Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Reconnecting Wildboy Creek. My name is David. I'm part of the team at Columbia Land Trust. Today, I'm joined by Sanoe, one of our natural area managers, and Pete, the Habitat Restoration Program Manager with the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. Today, we're excited to share the story of an incredible collaboration and how Columbia Land Trust, the Cowlitz Indian Tribe, and a host of dedicated partners came together to remove the Kwoneesum Dam and restore a vital ecosystem in the Columbia Basin. Before we dive into the presentation, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and we'll share a link once it's ready. Throughout the session, you're welcome to submit your questions using the Q&A module. After the presentation, we'll have time to answer a few of them. Before we turn it over to the speakers, for those of you who may be new to Columbia Land Trust, here's a quick introduction to who we are. The lower Columbia Basin is one of the most spectacular regions in the world, with its landscapes, biodiversity, and diverse ecosystems from the coast past the Dalles. It's also essential to our quality of life in this region. Columbia Land Trust works to ensure that this connection to nature endures for generations to come. We lead collaborative efforts to protect and strengthen key ecosystems along the Columbia River in both Oregon and Washington. That work is deeply rooted in partnerships with farmers, foresters, tribes, and communities. The work at Wildboy Creek underscores our commitment to partnering with tribes in our region, people who have taken care of these lands for time immemorial. Now, I'll hand it over to Sanoe to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sanoe Keliinoi, and I am the Natural Area Manager for the Wildboy Creek Natural Area. So I'm going to quickly orient us to more broadly to Columbia Land Trust's work and the area in which we work before we debut our wonderful joint film, followed by Pete's presentation on the tribe's work to facilitate this epic dam removal and stream restoration. So Columbia Land Trust works along the Columbia River and its tributaries, from its mouth near Astoria, Oregon, up to about the Dalles in the Columbia Plateau. The Land Trust mission is to conserve and care for the vital lands, waters, and wildlife of the Columbia River region through sound science and strong relationships. And this collaborative project between the Land Trust and the Cowlitz Indian Tribe is an example of this mission in action. So with that very large service area, there is obviously a ton of diversity across these lands, from the plant and people communities, the hydrology, geology, climate, etc. The Land Trust focuses our work across this varied geography by targeting specific priorities in what we call ecoregions. And that includes the Coast Range, the Willamette Valley, the West Cascades, the East Cascades, and the Columbia Plateau. So Wildboy Creek is located in the West Cascades ecoregion, and the main objectives for this area, as outlined in our conservation agenda, include connecting upland forest habitats for migratory wildlife, protecting old growth and managing acquired forests toward old growth characteristics, and protecting and enhancing habitat for salmon and steelhead. So here's kind of an overview of the restoration and project site. The Kwoneesum Dam was situated in the headwaters of Wildboy Creek, a tributary of the Washougal River that then meets the Columbia at about river mile 121. So in this map, you can see the cities of Vancouver and Portland to the west, and the urban industrial sprawl that is creeping easterly. The site sits in a mosaic of forested lands, some of those managed by the Washington Department of Natural Resources, and others managed by various industrial timber companies. To the far north lies the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, and then there are some rural home sites peppered across this landscape as well. Zooming in even closer to the Wildboy Creek property, it is outlined in red on this map here. It is approximately 1,300 acres, and in this aerial imagery, you can kind of see the evidence of its previous management. So the younger, more recently harvested and replanted forest stands being that lighter green color, and the darker green color depicting older trees. The land trust also owns the 330 acres outlined in yellow to the east. That is a forest that has not been harvested since the Yakult burn. And this property serves as an important reference site of what we hope Wildboy will look like in the future. So I know Pete is going to elaborate on the work being done for the benefit of salmon and steelhead, but I also wanted to briefly touch upon the forestry work that the Land Trust is doing in the uplands around the former dam site. So essentially, the goal here is to transition these young plantations of Douglas fir trees to forests with more old growth type characteristics. And of course, we could achieve that by letting the forest just grow back naturally and do its thing over a relatively long period of time. But with targeted management actions like the creation of snags, variable density thinning, interplanting of diverse plant species, and weed control, we can accelerate those natural processes and achieve forests that are functioning ecologically. And overall, those forests will be more diverse in structure, age, and species to be more resilient and healthier into the future. Oh, right, it's my last slide. So this is a brief timeline, a little behind the scenes of how this project came to fruition. The tribe approached the Land Trust in early 2017, and knowing that this project aligned for both of our organizations, it felt like a no-brainer to pursue. It took a couple of years of back and forth with the former landowner and fundraising for Columbia Land Trust to acquire the property and fee ownership in 2020. All the while, the tribe was doing their own fundraising and due diligence in pursuing and securing funding for the dam removal and restoration. There was a lot of permitting and planning with some delays before the project was started, but it was completed in 2024 and brings us to this presentation today. So shortly, Pete Barber with the Cowlitz Indian tribe is going to dive into the nitty-gritty details of the dam removal process. But first, we wanted to set the scene for you folks. So we are very excited to premiere this joint 10-minute film about the project.
Rivers were born to meander. Free-flowing rivers was always the intent of creation. We are here on ancient lands, Cowlitz lands. This magnificent land should be a sacred area for salmon, for all of the river life, but it was interrupted.
Yeah, the Cowlitz got involved when we first examined this site back in 2017. It was brought to my attention that there was a dam in the upper Washougal drainage. This is where I lived as a kid growing up, and I still live nearby. I eventually came to conclude it was the Campfire Girls' Kwoneesum Dam. It was built for recreation for the Campfire Girls back in 1964-65.
The camp was open 18 summers from 68 to 86, but I missed the first two. So 16 summers pretty much I was here. That's the first group of girls in 1968 getting off the bus. Everything we did at camp was centered around the lake. Swimming and canoeing and rowing and sailing. This is me and my best friend Holly, again, the one that was in the canoe with me. I have so many wonderful memories here. I'm there, and this is a bunch of my kids.
The story gets more interesting when the tribe got involved. They facilitated with the Columbia Land Trust and helped fund purchasing the property with the intent of taking out the dam.
It wasn't really on our radar until Pete brought it to us. And as soon as he brought it to us, you know, we could see the potential and how it fit into the larger conservation effort that we had going here.
The Columbia Land Trust came in and ultimately acquired the property, and we had kind of a deal where the land trust would buy the property and the tribe would be responsible for the dam removal. It's also the headwaters of the Washougal River. So this is an area with climate change coming on, that the headwaters are really the areas where fish are going to go to take refuge. They tend to be more resilient, and they also have great sources of cold water. The reservoir that was built with the dam was allowing the water to superheat. We had record temps going over 78 degrees, which is lethal for salmonids. Summer steelhead in the Washougal River are not doing real well. They're ESA listed. There's not a ton of fish coming back to the West Fork. And our hope here is to see new recruits coming back, utilizing this new habitat.
Well, fish are a first food. That's what makes us healthy and happy people. We want to be able to ensure that that food will be here for the future generations of our tribe and for the greater community as well.
On behalf of Columbia Land Trust, it is an honor to be collaborating with Cowlitz Indian Tribe on this project.
A big, mighty welcome from the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. Welcome to our cathedral. It is under repair.
Some people like to say, oh, isn't this beautiful when they get here? But that's not the way a lot of us see it. This is our ancestral lands, and we're bringing it back to the way it should be. I think the Columbia Land Trust, they're great partners, and without them, we wouldn't be able to be doing this.
Well, we can start at the beginning. I guess what I would call the beginning is the Yakult burn. So this area was burned, and then this area was logged. And part of the challenge of this site is that they had splash dams where they cut the trees, they build a dam essentially with logs, and then they blow that up and it flushes. And so Wildboy Creek has really been scoured to bedrock, and so it's got those scars from those historic events.
We're essentially lifting the whole creek up so that it's not just bedrock. We have a nice layer of boulders, gravel, cobble. A lot of that was washed out 120 years ago. What we're doing is bringing that back for better water quality and more sustainable fishery. So I think in 5 or 10 years, you can see a natural river that was a lot closer to what it was 120 years ago before the splash dam era.
Non-stop until it's done. We're about midway in the project, so we've got Wildboy Creek, 25 of 30-something structures complete downstream. We've completed spillway removal, and we've begun cutting new channels within the reservoir so we can create fish passage all the way up Wildboy through the dam footprint and to the tributaries above our project site.
When you're taking out a dam, a 55-foot tall, 425-foot wide earth embankment dam, there's a lot of uncertainty. So design and being able to roll with fit in the field, and as things progress, being able to change on the fly with your engineering team, with your contractor, with the tribe on site daily, has been quite a process.
Columbia Land Trust was instrumental in this project in allowing us to move forward with these huge restoration designs that was looking at removal of a high-risk dam, but also restoring access for fish passage to 6.5 miles of habitat upstream. Without Columbia Land Trust and having them on board as a partner, I don't think we'd be here today.
The best kind of conservation is collaboration, because you get to bring in multiple values and make sure that you're building something resilient. We really just look forward to continuing to work with Cowlitz on learning from them about what they know and what they do best, and we'll continue to work with them.
We Cowlitz are grateful. The Salmon Nation was finally heard through us. We can't thank our partners enough so that we, Cowlitz, could take down that dam.
It's incredible. It's emotional for me personally, because as a Native person, I understand the significance of this. This is why we do what we do in the agency. This is one of those projects that you just go, man, I'm glad we're a part of it.
We all shared a dream, and so here's the realization of that dream. So not only for me, but I'm sure it's a dream of the ancestors to see this come back.
From the beginning of time, the salmon said, "We will be here for your survival." And we said, "We will protect you." And that's what we're doing.
We've essentially built a whole bunch of luxury condos for these fish to use for spawning and for rearing. It's abound with wood and all the habitat that they need, all the resources they need to really exploit this area and then hopefully build that population. And so now we have to wait for the fish to see it and find it and smell it and come back in here and utilize the new habitat that's here.
Oh my goodness, I want to come back and see salmon in the creek down there.
Taking the dam out is only one portion, and then there's years of work ahead of us to achieve that ecosystem resilience. But once we start to shade this up, the water will cool significantly because we're at the upper watershed, and that will flow downstream all the way to the Columbia River.
Being out here and hearing the water is my favorite part. Hearing that water spilling over those logs that we placed and knowing the system is open for fish access, there's nothing better.
That was a really great video. Well, now that you all know the story, here's Pete to share with you all the technical processes that went into this restoration project.
All right, let's jump into our slideshow here. Welcome everyone. My name is Pete Barber, Habitat Restoration Program Manager for the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. I am pleased to review some of the details of this project. It was 8 years in the making. It is one of my proudest projects I've ever been able to implement. And I've got 85 slides of photos and videos, and we'll jump into kind of a general overview of this site. Right now, let me see if I can get rid of this real quick. There we go. All right, so here we are, Kwoneesum Dam. This is under kind of a higher flow. This is with all of our contractors. There's a lot of water here. This was really relayed as a dewatering project, more so than a dam removal project. General overview, Sanoe touched on it here. We are in Southwest Washington. For those who are calling in and aren't familiar with this location, we've got some urban settings nearby. Kwoneesum Dam is up in the kind of the upper Washougal. Headwaters is up off to the left where that red dot is, but we are in the headwaters of the West Fork Washougal. This is an overview of the dam, and I'll touch on some of the kind of the basics of this. But before we get into the dam, it was touched on in the video. The Washougal burn was really a significant impact to this area in general. It was pretty impressive. Over just a 36-hour period, you're looking at almost a 250,000 acres were burned. It was high winds. And right in the middle of that slide is Wildboy Creek. It was kind of right in the heart of the Washougal burn. And that had prolonged impacts, and we're still dealing with those impacts today, where you have essentially all of the old growth forests were incinerated. And those are the building blocks for all the fish habitat in stream. So once you take care of all the trees, it was it was worsened by all the logging back in that day. There was a lot of salvage logging that was going on, and that was done by splash damming, where they'd either dynamite a wooden dam with a reservoir of wood that was built up behind it, or they'd open up their sluice gates. And this was a common occurrence in the Washougal River. At one time, there were 11 dams on the Washougal. And this is deluge of wood moving downstream. You can imagine what it would do to all the fish that were living there, as well as blowing out all the spawning gravels within that watershed. This is a photo that was taken from the Two Rivers Heritage Museum in Washougal. This is the Washougal River. You can see an individual standing on that log jam, as they call it. And you can see the size of the wood that was moved through the system, and you can imagine what those impacts would be. We had a splash dam within the footprint of where Kwoneesum Dam was built on Wildboy Creek. Some of the old slides of the site donated by Nancy King. She was in the video. I owe her definitely for sharing all of these old slides and information on the site. But you can see the crib matrix here within the footprint of the dam. And it was really something that had some major impacts downstream in Wildboy Creek, with that deluge of wood that would move through the system, blowing out all the gravels, and ultimately scouring the majority of Wildboy Creek down to bedrock. You can see the log jam there in the background. Upstream of where this splash dam was, this was a photo from 1958. You can see there's 3 tributaries coming in, low gradient, looks like there's a fair bit of wood. You can still see some of the old Yakult snags in the background there. They're all charred. But for fish and spawning and rearing, this image here is really kind of hits the mark on what we wanted to use this site as, like an analog. This is what our reference would be. And this is all removed once Campfire Girls came in. So the dam footprint is here outlined in red. You can see kind of the area that was soon to be cleared and backwatered with the building of Kwoneesum Dam within the footprint of the splash dam. 1960s, early 1960s, Campfire Girls started a fundraising for this offset of their camp. They're currently housed at Camp Namanu, which is off the Sandy River. They had met capacity and needed to expand, and they ultimately raised just over $350,000 back in the early 60s. That was a real sum of money to build Kwoneesum Dam and the camp surrounding it. Starting off with building a dam, they had to build themselves a reservoir. That involved a lot of clearing and grubbing, excavation of all of the material that was within that reservoir footprint. They like to burn all that, slash piles, and often there were tires that were used. We actually found some old tires that were buried in the sediment out there from their burning of the slash piles. And then here off in the right-hand side, there's a tree that's still out there today that we are able to use as a reference for these photos and the sequence of photos that we were able to kind of see how the reservoir was built. Lots of clearing, lots of excavation, and essentially creating a footprint for that water to be backwatered for the Campfire Girls. This was really quite an undertaking in the day. And we can still see that tree in the background, and now they're kind of getting down to final grade. There's a bedrock shelf on the right-hand side of that the screen there. We will see that over and over again here in our slides moving forward. You can see this was quite an operation. It took them 2 years to excavate this reservoir, and this was kind of when they were done. And not surprisingly, once we dewatered this 20 million gallons of water, this is exactly what we saw. The site really hadn't changed. It was just underwater. And here it is as they are filling the reservoir. And this is essentially once the reservoir was filled. This is what we got to work with. So just an overview of this dam. This is after they were finished with construction and started dewatering or rewatering up the reservoir. They excavated about 20,000 cubic yards of material to build the dam. The dam, as touched on the video, was 55 feet tall, 425 feet long. It's a 9-acre impoundment, about 104 acre feet. The reservoir is fed by 3 tributaries. We call them the headwaters of Wildboy. And then once the camp was closed, it had gone through a series of commercial timber owners, industrial timber forests, and has been managed that way ever since until Columbia Land Trust purchased the property. This is what it looked like once we got to dewatering and down to the base of the dam. And now I'm just going to kind of give an overview, a very brief overview of all of the details that got us to this point. So just to touch back on why we went to this massive effort to remove this dam. So specific for summer steelhead and recovery, hot water is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for any salmonids. And the worst part is this is in the headwaters of the Washougal. So ideally this should be your clearest, coldest water, snow melt, spring fed. And instead we had a reservoir that was all the surface water coming off it that was superheated and lethal to fish. So that was a big one to get rid of. And then the second part was dams. They block the movement of sediment and wood. And Wildboy Creek was already starved and scoured down to bedrock. So that was really critical to trying to jumpstart production in that degraded creek. And then dams also block the passage of spawning gravels, and then that wood that's necessary for rearing. And then last, the other big one here was 6.5 miles of upstream habitat. That's a pretty sizable amount of area for fish to spawn and to rear. Here's our contractor meeting. We had 35 contractors come out and take a look at the site. We only had 3 bids. We effectively scared most of them off. This was a massive undertaking. This is another view of the dam from the opposite side, looking across it. You can see the outlet and the waterfall there on the right. And then downstream of the dam, where we rebuilt the whole creek, was scoured to bedrock. So you had these sheets of bedrock, terrible habitat for fish, and really nothing for spawning. I call it a bedrock cookie sheet. It was something that you couldn't really make it a lot worse. However, up in the tributary channels that fed into the reservoir, you saw really nice gravels, cold water. It was everything that we wanted to have fish access to. Construction was delayed in 2023, but we used that as an opportunity to bring in all the materials that we were going to need for construction in 24. We ended up sorting through the 20,000 cubic yards that was excavated from the construction of the reservoir. And then we brought in just over 850 pieces of wood that would be placing within the reservoir footprint, and then the half mile of Wildboy Creek downstream of the dam. This material that we sorted that came out of the reservoir footprint was sorted into 3 piles, as you see here. These are massive mountains of material. We have our boulders, we have small boulders, gravel, and then topsoil as well. And all of this was utilized and incorporated back into our restoration work, both within the tributaries and downstream of the dam in Wildboy Creek. So we got our designs and all of our permits. That was a lot of fun. That took a couple of years. And then we started our operations here. First things was to make sure there aren't any fish coming back into the system from your tributaries. Katie Fielding is there on the left. She's our restoration ecologist, and Justin Isle is on the right there. These 2 individuals were the only reason why this project was completed, and I didn't go completely insane. Very complicated project to implement, and there was 3 of us kind of running point out there every day. I owe them a lot, and this is our project. This isn't my project. It was everything with these 2 folks. So we got the site isolated, and now it's pumping, a whole lot of pumping. We had a half mile of HDPE pipe, as you see on the right-hand side there, that spanned around the reservoir, collected each of the 3 tributaries, and was pumped into an adjacent stream called Texas Creek. And then all the clean water or clear water that came out of the reservoir was also pumped to Texas Creek. This is kind of the diffuser in Texas Creek footprint of it, the before and after. And these pumps were run for the better part of 5 months until, well, they were run continuously for the tributaries. And then once we had the reservoir dewatered, those pumps were shut off. This is a brief time lapse of the dewatering of the reservoir. Makes it look really easy, but it's this was a fun one to watch to see as this reservoir is drawn down, how some of the sediment kind of slumps there. There's some grass that starts growing on the lower left-hand side. And this is through the better part of a month and a half to get this reservoir down to where we could start to entertain taking out the dam. This was a real process, and it's pretty amazing to look at it in this kind of fast forward sense. But this was a hefty undertaking by the contractor at the time. So as that was being dewatered, we essentially shut off all of our flow for Wildboy Creek. So once flow stopped in Wildboy Creek, it was time to clear fish from a half mile. And you can see kind of the degraded habitat that we have here, lots of bedrock, not a lot of wood, not much spawning gravel. And this was done with a whole host of folks that came out to help. We had 3 backpacks going, and in a matter of a 2-day period, we effectively cleared this site, primarily almost all cutthroat trout within this project reach. And then we had to get those fish out of that site and into the adjacent tributary Texas Creek or up in the headwaters of Wildboy Creek. Cutthroat trout will eat anything they can fit in their mouth, including each other. This was it's kind of a notable here. But getting these fish out of this canyon in Wildboy Creek took some figuring out, and we kind of came up on a new idea. And this was a great way to get fish out in a fast manner. And it was something that we hadn't seen before. And one of the foresters or loggers that we talked to gave us the recommendation of a heavy drone. A heavy drone is capable of carrying up to 75 pounds. So a bucket full of fish was no problem. And we lifted out all of our fish and put them into our cooler and transported them from here. And the drone really made it a really easy and seamless ability to get these fish out versus trying to hike them out of a can. Also, we had to remove, Land Trust was in charge of removing their western pearl shell mussel. These are old-lived mussels. Some of these will get up to 80 years old or greater. 3,500 plus mussels were removed from the system before we dewatered it. And those mussels will be planted back into the system once it kind of goes through this maturation process. This is what construction looks like. I wanted to show you guys kind of the nitty gritty. We rebuilt the stream. You're looking at bedrock, and it was bringing in logs and all that rock that came out, and essentially building a series of lifts and grade logs through the system to build a brand new stream bed. This was a messy project. We had a spring upstream that kept it watered up, but it helped seal these grade logs that we placed. And it was really a process that they got a lot of muddy water, and the only way we could really collect that muddy water was down at the bottom end of the site where we had pumps running 24/7 to take that material out and pump it into a settling pond that had it's called a geotube. It's like a great big pillow that's permeable, and it traps all of that fine sediment in the pillow, and then the clear water runs out and then back into the adjacent creek. This is a series of time lapse of dewatering that reservoir, and moving through the process of construction, and then building the new tributary channels within this open template. We ended up finding gravels within the reservoir footprint, and utilize that to make our alignments of these new tributary channels, and then loaded them full of wood and rock. Here's another image of going through some of the sequencing. This is from an aerial drone looking down on the project site. We've started with a dam removal there on the right arrow. More dam removal, cutting the channels, starting the process of kind of the triage of building new channels and removing the dam. You got to be careful here. This one's a number of slides, and this is essentially the finished product before we started to fully water up the site. So again, kind of the before and after on this. This is what we were dealing with in Wildboy Creek downstream. Lots of bedrock. Yeah, not a great spot for fish. This is essentially what it looks like after we left. Lots of wood, a brand new stream bed. And this has gone through a couple high flow events, and most of this material has stayed stable, and it looks really good today. Be careful on that. There we go. Here's another one looking at bedrock. And then this is what it looks like today. If you're a fish, there's lots of complexity. There's spawning gravels here, rearing. It's a great place to be, and not to forget, this is all cold water. Here's one looking at the dam from the downstream end. This is our electrofishing crew. And then this is what it looks like today. That reservoir on the right-hand side is deep. It's upwards of 23 feet deep. It's perfect for steelhead to over summer, and it stays nice and cool. Going through some before and after photos here. This is looking across. This is during construction. This is in the midst of construction and taking out that spillway. Filling it back up with all the burden pulled from the excavation of the dam. And then this is what it looks like if we're out on the site today, except now we have it, it's planted pretty heavily. More of those. Here's looking across, dewatering, construction, removal of that dam, taking the concrete face apart and recycling it. And that's essentially the finished product. And then here, this last one here is another time lapse. This is taking apart the dam and just piece by piece, moving that material out, sorting out some of the boulders, recycling all that concrete and rebar, and then backfilling it within kind of the reservoir footprint. A lot of that material stayed on site. A lot of it was moved downstream. A lot of the boulders were repurposed for our restoration efforts, both in the tributary channels and then also in Wildboy Creek as well. We didn't get too particular about rock. Any rock was good compared to bedrock. And this is kind of the final stage of rebuilding that new channel and preparing to water up the site. And this is all the placement of the wood as grade controls through here. So we didn't have a head cut that was ripping up through the project site. All right, and that is it for my part. This is our drone video taken this winter. This was in right around November period, so we had plenty of water. And I'm going to stop talking and enjoy this. Thank you. So, is this project a success? Have the fish responded? That is the kicker here. We saw some adults in this reach. We weren't sure if they were going to spawn. We assumed they would. So there's a process called eDNA where you can go out and sample the water, and you can elect to pick up different fragments of DNA that might be shed from a variety of different organisms. This one, we specifically were looking at steelhead or Omicus or Oncorhynchus micus, sorry. And this was one that this is the steelhead, essentially. Sea run rainbow trout, aka steelhead. We sampled this site in October. Not surprisingly, there were no fish, no juveniles, nothing. We came back here in June, a couple weeks ago, sampled the site again upstream of the dam, and we had hits in the west tributary, which is one, nothing in the north tributary, and then we had a number of hits in the east tributary. So we can say right now with a level of confidence that we have fish that have recolonized this site, and this was a surprise to me. There's really no reason for fish to be in here. They haven't utilized this area for a number of years, and steelhead are weedy, and they've been able to see that or smell, or who knows. They came back, and this is the first step in recovery and recolonization of this site. So this is a really fun slide for me to include. With that said, special thanks, Columbia Land Trust, of course, Tribe, Katie, Fielding, and Justin Isle. Couldn't have done it without you. And then, of course, couldn't have done it without our funding sources there. This is a key part of implementation for this project. This is all grant funds. And with that, I'm going to go into Q&A, and we can share.
All right. Thank you so much, Pete and Sanoe. It's so incredibly inspirational to see the tangible outcomes of this work, highlighted by the return of steelhead, which is especially amazing. It looks like we've got a few questions, so let's take some time to answer a few of those now. First question is, why did you dewater the reservoir to another creek rather than downstream of the construction?
Yeah, we had to look at dewatering. Dewatering the reservoir was a part of our requirements from Department of Ecology in their Clean Water Act, which is essentially we can't have any turbid water moving downstream. We knew there were potential issues with a blow and go type of approach, like they did at Condit and even in Elwha and the Klamath dams as well, where you have a release, an explosion and a release of sediment moving downstream. The sediment behind this dam was semi-suspended. So if it was agitated or put into solution, it would travel all the way through the Washougal River and have some pretty horrible impacts for fish and fish life and aquatic life in general. So it was also a risk for that type of approach, for having an uncontrolled release of water downstream with the amount of private landowners as well. So it was a controlled dewatering, and the utility of having Texas Creek right next to it was the preferred approach, and that's essentially what we had to implement.
Great, thanks, Pete. We have a few questions about plants. Will plants naturally migrate back into the riverbanks, or are they moved in and replanted? And then what types of plants are being reintroduced to this area?
Yeah, there's a very heavy replanting plan that we're currently going through our first round of implementation this last winter. We'll be going back through and replanting. We're seeing a lot of native seeds that are just coming from the surrounding canopy. There's lots of small Douglas fir starts that are popping up. But we've got kind of a broad range of both conifer and deciduous species out there, as well as some wetland species down along the creek margin, planting a lot of willows. And this is going to be a 5-year replanting process through this reach to make sure this denuded landscape is fully greened up and has a whole assortment of different plant and shrub species.
Great. Next question is, what was the log supply for the down woody debris added to the creek post-rehabilitation?
Yeah, the log supply, essentially all that wood that was incorporated into this project was collected locally, in large part from some of the developers here that were clearing lands for housing or name a thing. And that wood was purchased and brought out for a better part of a year-long period. And then also we utilized a number of smaller second growth trees that Columbia Land Trust had donated in some of their thinning operations near to this site, and utilized that that material for complexity features within the log jams that were built.
Excellent. It seems like from a few questions that there's some curiosity about how fish find their way back upstream and back to this area. It seems like you may have some of the same questions, Pete. But yeah, do you care to elaborate on that a bit further of just kind of what do you think could be the reason? How much of an understanding is there? Is this kind of one of those mysteries that we haven't figured out just yet?
Yeah, well, steelhead are known as being a weedy species of salmonid. That they tend to stray a little bit more. They will come back to their home waters, but they will duck in and check out other areas, more so than other salmonids. We had a population that we knew that was coming back to Texas Creek, which is a tributary that was right next to Wildboy Creek that flowed in right near the bottom end of our project site. When we were doing all of our fish clearing, once we got down to near the confluence of Texas Creek, we started to see juvenile steelhead, Omicus. And that was an indicator that there was a seed source, shall we say, that was in Texas Creek. So likely any fish that were coming back as adults to Texas Creek, all they had to do was, instead of turning right to go up Texas Creek, they could just continue on up Wildboy, and it's in our project site. So I think right now, if I had to guess, I think we have a number of fish, at least a pair, that was likely just a stray from Texas Creek, or may have potentially spawned in lower Wildboy Creek and was a little more adventurous and started to repopulate this site. We'll take it.
That's great. We have time for about 3 more questions here. So I'm going to go with, would you be able to explain just the importance of logs in stream restoration?
Yeah, the tribe and our habitat restoration mantra, really what we look at when we're going into treatment of a reach or going into a degraded site like this is it's not going to be a couple pieces of wood. It's going to be lots of wood, and our whole focus is under the guise of intensive and extensive. So we're going to be placing lots of trees and creating roughness features that also creates habitat in areas that are going to either trap gravels that are moving through the site. It might create log jams that will actually create roughness that backs up water, that engages floodplains, that has another round of benefits for both fish and slowing sediment moving through the system. Messy rivers are good rivers. So if you see a straight section of river with no wood in it, it tends to lend itself to not really being highly productive. It doesn't offer much for fish. So we really went to an extra effort here to making sure this reach had lots of wood and lots of that complexity and features that were going to lend itself to being great for spawning and rearing.
Excellent. There's a few questions about the fish hatchery downstream and how this project relates to that fish hatchery, and if that's fully passable.
Yeah, this project has no tie to the hatchery downstream. This is specific for steelhead, both winter and summer steelhead. There are a few coho that might come back to the West Fork, but primarily this is a steelhead project. And the hatchery downstream has its own list of operations, and it's not really tied to what we're doing upriver.
Got it. Thank you. And our last question for today is going to be, if you both could elaborate a bit on what's ahead for Columbia Land Trust in this area, and then for Cowlitz Indian Tribe in this area.
Well, I'll kick it off.
You wanna kick it off?
Yeah, so the Cowlitz Indian tribe, this is something in the Washougal. That's my home water. That's what I grew up in. So, and it's important to the tribe, and this is a kind of a jumpstart on our focused effort of that intensive and extensive kind of treatment of this watershed. So, we're looking at if you're going to move the dial for production and restoration and overall population recovery, you got to treat up to 30% or more of the watershed. So we've treated it a little bit here, a couple miles. So the next step for the tribe is we're pursuing funds to work in the lower mile of Wildboy Creek, downstream of where we stopped our restoration efforts, as well as looking a little closer in the West Fork Washougal for future work in that site, and then also in the headwaters of the Washougal up at a location called Punchbowl Falls, and looking at providing access over that falls and restoring those upper reaches, miles of habitat upstream that is in the coldest and really some of the most isolated areas of the Washougal, specific for recovery of summer steelhead stocks. Go ahead, Sanoe.
So yes, Columbia Land Trust is going to continue to partner with Cowlitz Indian Tribe on future phases of this restoration on the West Fork Washougal. We own that lower mile section of Wildboy Creek that we're applying for grant funding for. And then just touching upon that forestry work that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation is that there's a lot of acres around the former dam site that need some help in getting away from that really crowded plantation stand to a more older type forest. So that's what we're doing.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Sanoe. I lied. One last question, kind of related to that last one. Are there any other dams in similar nature in that they were defunct or no longer in use in the area that you have your sights set on?
In the area, I know there's a dam. It's an old splash dam in Hagen Creek. There's potential to look at that, but I know there's a barrier falls below it. I know there's one up in the headwaters of the Washougal too, on the West Fork. But again, that's above fish access. No, I'd say for right now, this was a one for us to address. Dams aren't easy projects, and we're looking at fish passage elsewhere.
Great. Well, thanks both again. Yeah, absolutely amazing to hear you both speak about this project. I feel like I learn something new every time I hear you speak about it. That's all the time we have for questions for today. If we weren't able to get to your question, feel free to reach out to us at connect@columbialandtrust.org, and we will get back to you. A huge thank you to everyone who joined us. Incredible to see so many people taking time in their day to learn more about this project. If you're feeling inspired to learn more, get involved, or support our work, we'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
That's good.
Thanks, everybody.